Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world and experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy. Here is where you free your soma. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Free Your Soma, stories of somatic awakening and how to live from the inside out. I am super duper excited today because I have Toni Nagy with me today, and I've been following her on Instagram for about a year now, and she is so hilarious and awesome. And the first, I have to say, before I introduce her completely, the first video that I saw of hers was where she's in this little skit with a therapist, and the therapist is sitting on the couch with his legs crossed and his little pad of paper, and she's doing the most big, expressive full body movements as she's talking about moving emotions and energy through her body. And there's this kind of straight man there trying to psychotherapize her, and she ends up turning the tables on him, and by the end of it they're both moving around and doing these really expressive movements. And I just thought, this is brilliant. For one, I don't see people using their full body in their comedy very often. Of course we have people we can think about who do that throughout history. It's a big part of comedy, being physical in your body. But I feel like more and more these days people are kind of closed in and not doing that kind of comedy. And so I found this incredibly inspiring and refreshing. And then just watching Toni kind of develop over the last year and develop more and more of a following, get her name more and more out there. I've just been so excited to watch her journey, and I'm excited for this interview. So Toni is a comedian, a dancer, and she's a human on planet Earth. And her comedy, in my opinion, it really is pushing the bars of what we expect from a female comedian, but also just what we expect to hear from someone, over the course of a 5-minute video. You really get out there and get deep and get strange and get interesting with things. So I'm really excited for this conversation, and I would love to have you introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, thank you for that. It's funny to hear about yourself in someone else's mouth. I mean, that thought, I think it's a kind of common philosophical quandary of how many different versions of you exist in the people who experience you. And as somebody who projects myself out into the cosmos, I sometimes forget that I exist in all these people's heads that I do not know and have never met and may never even connect with. You have all these people that watch your content without necessarily, connecting with you even in the astral plane or the quantum plane of the internet. So I was just suddenly wow, I do exist in the heads of others. And I'm that's kind of a funny thought to me. There's a lot of my pelvis out there in the world, and I stand by it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, that's the other thing is watching you move is inspiring. And you have I guess most people would describe it as interpretive dance that goes along with these philosophical, spiritual, socio-political ideas that you're presenting. And you're so natural and fluid with it. That's part of why I wanted to invite you onto the podcast to talk about kind of the realm of somatics from your particular lens.
Yeah, I mean, interpretive dance to me, I'm not exactly even sure I know what that means beyond just it being kind of a campy comedic gesture. I don't think anyone would take interpretive dance seriously as an art form. It's kind of meant as almost a clowning thing that one would do. It's derivative of modern dance or contemporary dance or something, but now, and I've never really thought, I'm well, is anyone doing interpretive dance seriously? Or because I just thought it was funny. I was just oh yeah, it would be interpretive dance is funny and silly. And I think that was why I married these two kind of concepts of interpretive dance and political social commentary. Cause I was oh, the seduction of the absurd with the serious. I think that was
Yeah.
what my intention was from the beginning.
Awesome. I love that because often the serious gets really, really serious and really, really heavy if we don't have some levity, right? If we don't have something to kind of balance it out, it can be easy for people to want to turn away. But if you can also make people laugh a little bit or have some enjoyment, they'll actually lend their ear a little deeper, I think.
Yeah, it's such an interesting balance because on the one hand, you don't want to minimize the intensity of global suffering that is happening, which is undigestible, right? It's too much. It's just like, I think we're experiencing a collective IBS,
Mm.
a social diarrhea, where nobody can digest the level of pain that is projected out. However, when things are kind of like, we see it. When things are too comedic, then it's just like, oh, whatever, whatever. It's almost like, do you remember there was these concerts, the free Tibet concerts? And then they were like, oh, we're raising money for Tibet. And it's almost like in that effort to quote unquote free Tibet with these concerts, it's like when the concerts are over, the public is like, oh, Tibet must be free because there's no more concerts. So
Mm.
it's interesting, like marrying causes with artistic expression. I oscillate between like, is this is this the language or isn't it? However, it's the language that I play with because at least it's like diving into a consciousness where people are becoming more aware. But in order to be a true quote unquote activist or citizen of the world, it is going to take personal action. And how do you spread personal action? I don't know. It's that does happen, I think, within the family a little bit. Like I'm thinking about this only because I was having this conversation with my friend about, she has a kid who's younger than my kid. My kid's 13. And we were talking about, some issue, and she was like asking for advice about her child. And I was like, well, you could tell your kid to say whatever the fuck you want. It doesn't mean they're going to say it. The kid is going to embody the culture of your family. So if you want to give your child values, you have to embody those values. That has to be the consistent culture within your family in order for that to fully integrate within their being. And when I think about education, when I think about any of these things, I can say whatever I want, but is anyone else going to embody it if I'm not embodying it? No. So it's like I have to embody what the hell I'm talking about. And in order for me to do that, I have to be on that consistent path of integrity, which is not easy. I'm not saying I'm accomplishing it. I'm saying I attempt to.
Right. It's an ongoing practice because life is overwhelming. And as you said, sometimes completely undigestible. And there are things that happen to us throughout our lives or even throughout our day that throw us off. And we're like out there seeking comfort from the catastrophes or the pain that's showing up. And so it's easy to get out of integrity, in a split second in our lives. And so it's always about reorienting back to what's important. And we get better and better at reorienting ourselves and coming back to that, right?
Yeah, I love the reorientation because it has a dance metaphor.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about like you've been dancing a long time and tell us a little bit about like your dance journey. Because I know dancers, they have a specific way they relate to their body and to somatics sometimes. Did you know about somatics from a dance point of view?
So I started dancing late in life. I was 19. So that's a very different experience than someone who starts as a young child. I mean, it's two different worlds, right? And the advantage of starting when you're young is like from a physical standpoint, you probably are going to be better. You're going to have more flexibility, you're going to have more training just because you have more years doing it. The advantage of starting when you're older is there's a certain like intellectual sophistication that happens with our relationship to the body. However, a lot of adults or older teens do not start dance because they find it humiliating. It's really hard to be bad. It's really hard to compare yourself to others who have more training, who have more experience, and there's like a self-consciousness that exists when we get older that, a 3-year-old isn't self-conscious in the same way. I mean, they begin to be, but it kind of takes time for that to fully take over. So there's a lot of, I think physically it's probably easier to start younger, and from a psychological perspective you're a little more open. However, there's a different potential when you start when you're older because you have this wisdom that you're bringing to the table. So when I started dancing, it was kind of random. I was just a very physical person. I was diagnosed as a young kid ADHD, and I did not resonate with that. Like, I understood I was annoying and that like adults wanted me to stop. Like, I got that, but like a diagnosis, even as a 9-year-old, I was like, what? I rejected that. And I'm not like speaking for anyone else's path or anyone else's desire to understand their own brain. I'm just speaking from my own experience because I know it's a sensitive topic. However, from my experience, I felt very boxed in when someone was like, you're this thing and you have this problem, and here is this medication to make you stop being like that. And as a child, I was like, well, then who would I be if I took this medication? Like, what would this medication do to my personality? I was very concerned with like this impact on my personality, which is incredibly ironic because PS, I've done like a bajillion drugs since then. It's not like I haven't experimented with drugs. 100% I have and do. But I just, something about the taking of this thing every day in order to impact my personality, which was how I was understanding it as a kid, I was like, no, thank y'all. So my teacher was like, well, you're very annoying and you have to stop being so annoying. And so her suggestion, I think it was her suggestion, was you need to get all your beans out. So you got to move your body more. I think it was her who told me that. I don't know who told me that. So anyway, my grandmother, just some random grandmother. No, my personal grandmother gave me roller skates around the same time. So I would come home from school and I would put on roller skates, and then I would roller skate for 7 hours. Like, I would roller skate from 7 until or 3 until like 9 at night. I would just roller skate around. And so then I would be more tired and I would be subsequently less annoying and more focused. And so I think that taught me at an early age, like, oh, I have to like move my body a certain amount every day in order to like be accepted.
Or
And also to
regulate.
be like happy in a certain sense. I think I
Yeah.
was probably happier. I don't know. I was like a kind of a dark kid. I don't know if I was ever really happy. I didn't resonate. I also didn't resonate with being a child, but which is again ironic because I'm like, people would probably think I'm sort of like playful and immature now. But long story very long is that what was I even talking about? Why did I start this?
We were talking about the dancing, like,
Oh yeah,
coming
the
into
dancing.
dance.
So
Yeah.
I started dancing because I went to a school that did not have sports, and I had played sports my whole life. And my mother actually was like, you should go to Sarah Lawrence College. I knew nothing about this college. I didn't particularly want to go to college. Yes, retrospectively, I 100% understand college is a deep privilege, and I was incredibly lucky. This was not lost on me. But when I was applying, my parents are professors. They wanted me to go to college, and I was like, fuck education, fuck you, mom and dad, I'm not going to college. And then my mom was like, yes, you are. So she wanted me to go to the school called Sarah Lawrence that was very artsy, very like creative, very like counterculture, the complete opposite of my upbringing up until then. I had gone to a school that was like kind of sports oriented and everyone wore Gap and shit like that. So when I landed at that school, I was like, what the hell? Like, where am I? It was a culture shock. I was like, this is like the Lilith Fair. What's going on? Like, these aren't my people. And the only like physical outlet was dance. And so I was like, oh, I'll just try this. Cause I used to go out dancing at clubs and at raves. I don't know. They don't have raves anymore. But back in my day, there would be these raves where you would just like take ecstasy and crystal meth and dance for 7 hours and acid. And I was like, oh yeah, I do that. That's something I do. So I had been dancing since and I would always dance in my room alone. Cause I think that's what people did in the 90s. You danced alone in your room and like thought about things because you didn't have a phone.
Right.
And so
Now people just record it, right? Now people do that, but they record it and put it on the internet.
you like literally just made that connection for me. I was like, right, that's exactly what happens. And that's like exactly what my life is like. Wait a minute. Like, you're just like putting the pieces together of the last like 25 years of my life. I'm like, wait a goddamn second. Yeah, my whole high school years, I was also super depressed because I think of the birth control pills.
Mm.
So I would dance in my room to like Fiona Apple, just like expressing my total sorrow. constantly. And then I would go out to raves and do drugs. And then I would go to clubs and do drugs. I don't know how I was getting in these clubs. Oh, I do. I got a tattoo at 15 and I would be like, this is my ID, you know? And then people would let us in because I was dressed like a harlot. So dancing was a part of my life and a part of my medicine, but I had never been trained. And then it was in college that I started this training. And I was very bad. I was the worst person in every class for all 4 years, always the worst. And that was its own important humbling because someone had to be the worst and it might as well have been me. And I learned a lot by being really bad.
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of courage to be really bad and keep showing up. So if anything, you built some character, like some strength of character in just being okay that you were going to, still be like probably bad today, or maybe not bad, just on that like spectrum of like who was in the room. Like you just were down here in the lower ranks, maybe because of what you said before about not dancing as a kid or things like that, or maybe even just the way that your movement was so personal. It sounds like, you danced as a teenager to like outlet feelings and emotions. And I mean, you still do that. That's different than someone who's dancing to be perfect. That's different than someone who's dancing to perform for others. It sounds like dancing has always been a personal process for you. And that could be, in a dance class, that could register as like not as good. That's a D, right? Versus somebody who's there trying to please everybody.
Hell yeah. I'm like, why do you understand me so well? I'm like, yeah, I really vibe with what you said. Yeah, I mean, I think that actually makes tons of sense. It's like the personal practice versus the aesthetic practice. And like, I do want to say the concept of training, right? Because training is a very valuable thing to do. However, training can also pull you from your personal practice or pull you from your personal exploration. And they're kind of, I mean, in a perfect world, there's a dance between the two. Because if you only have training, it's very hard to break free from it and figure out where your voice is because the training is such a loud voice in your head that extrapolating from it or experimenting from it or even deviating from it is more difficult because the training is so loud. However, if you have zero training, you're not referencing anything either. And it's kind of easy to get into a pattern because you're just kind of doing an expression and you don't have the training to deviate from, right? So it is interesting, I think, to give yourself the medicine of both, of like times of training and times of like vast personal reflection and exploration. But I will say that like now that I've had more training over the many, many years, I have more creativity because I have more ideas of where to pull from.
Yeah, absolutely. That reference point or having varying reference points, as you just said, is a big part of being able to make it your own, right? To be able to play with these different ideas that have been like shared with you and then start digesting them and making them part of you and then being able to experience them authentically, right? Because that's ultimately what we're after in like a teacher or a personality, I guess. Like we want to experience an authentic person, not just someone who's regurgitating things that they learned at some point in a dogmatic way. Like that's not interesting. We could just go read a textbook. If we want to be around another human, we want them to have like absorbed and integrated this knowledge and then made it their own so that we can make it our own, so that we can transmit that. Like kind of back to what you were saying about embodying this shit instead of just saying it, right? And just showing up and saying the right things versus showing up and being a person who's integrated the things that they've learned, right?
Hell yeah. Yeah, I'm like, I really like you on your podcast. All the things you're saying, I'm like, feel very
Sweet.
by it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I love your videos because you do this really wonderful thing where you're just going off, I guess we could say, and I've had friends or I've known people, I would say, that have that like archetype of like super smart, articulate, creative, and they just start talking and you're like listening to them and they're just like blowing your mind, making you laugh. Suddenly you want to cry and you're just going through this whole gamut of feelings while this person is sharing like basically their inner monologue with you. Right. And I've had those moments when I'm like watching your videos and there's a few that I just like had to watch like 3 times because I was like, I missed something. She said this and then she said this so quickly and it like changed the direction. So I kind of felt like you know, oh, like she's my people. Like I can vibe with this. Like there's a connection here. So it's also why I wanted to bring you into
Yes,
like
I'm
my
like,
little world.
you remind me of me, and I like it.
I'm like me and I want more of
Yeah,
me.
yes. That's how I was feeling about you. I'm like, yes, this person reminds me a lot of myself, and I'm very into it.
Well, yeah, well, going back to what you said earlier about like not wanting your personality to be changed by a drug unless you're choosing that, you know, like this idea of like a doctor coming in and saying, oh, like this is wrong with you, this will fix you. And that you rejected that early on actually shows a substantial amount of self-love that you have carried, you know, kind of. And I think of that as like a certain level of integrity that people carry when they have that sort of like self-preserving love.
Love it. Oh, yeah. I also almost think it's like self-curiosity, because self-love to me, well, okay, I find love to be a complex idea because I think a lot of, maybe this is a Western, programming. But I think a lot of the collective understanding of love is like, I love you because I like the way I feel about me when I'm around you. So my quote unquote love for you is a projection of my own experience of myself within your presence. I'm not saying that's what like big L love is. I'm kind of saying that is a paradigm within the language of love that I think is kind of hard to apply to the self. But if I think of like the concept of, and like also, you know, maybe I like, I don't know, I have like a body reaction to self-love, even though I probably like mention it, is like love almost has this encompassing assumption that it's like completely pure or something. But then my experience of human love, I would not say is pure. I would say it's complicated. Like to experience genuine, unconditional love from human to human is a life process that, I would say is pretty, it's a process. I don't think like everyone's just like, oh, I'm just unconditionally loving everyone and myself constantly. So I guess that's why I think of like this concept of curiosity,
Mm.
because if I'm curious about a person, if I'm curious about myself, if I'm curious about humanity, if I'm curious about the world, then like love folds in and out of that, because you can't love something you're not curious about. But like, you know what I'm saying? You understand my
Oh
conflict.
yeah,
Yeah, it's an inner
totally.
something about self-love. I'm like, what does that fucking mean? I'm fucking always I also hate myself
I
sometimes.
know. And I think that you know, maybe like we're limited in our language. Like they say that, I don't know, in French or Italian or whatever, there's like 13 different words for love. And it's
I
like a
think in
different
Greek
word for
there's like
love.
36.
Right. And it's like loving another person versus loving spaghetti. But like in English, we just like have the same word for like, you know, loving like our child as we do for loving spaghetti, which is sort of bizarre. Right. So we're limited in like our language for one, but like also what you're saying is that like there's complexity, meaning there's usually multiple things we're feeling at once, even when we're feeling love for someone. It's like, oh, I love you. And I also want to slap you right now, you know? And you can feel that way about yourself. You can feel that way like looking in the mirror at yourself. Like, I appreciate you and I love you. And I also want to like just knock you over right now. And so I think maybe like when I think of love, it's like a container that holds everything, you
Oh,
know?
cool. No.
Like a bigger container that's holding it all, but we have these like limited little like micro explanations for it because of our limited language in English.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And I also think like, what was it about me at that time that was like so kind of rejecting? I also think I had a distrust for adults. I had a distrust for systems. Even then, I was like, I don't know if I want to fit into your dumb little school and your stupid little like your desks are dumb. Like, all of these things that it's funny, as a quote unquote free spirit, I'm also very uptight and like super intense about rules also. However, I have to see the rules as meaningful to me in a deeper way. There has to be like a spiritual connection to these rules. So for example, I went to a silent meditation retreat. It was a Chinese Buddhist retreat. So there was a lot of cultural things that I was being exposed to for the first time. However, I really trusted the intention of the rules in this retreat, which was, to better understand the nature in my mind. Therefore, I was compulsive about following the rules. They told me to say the mantra 24 hours a day. I was going to say that mantra 24 hours a day. So it's interesting. I have like this like deep rejection and rebellion against rules, but also like a Stalinist commitment to rules as well. Like, so it's a contradiction. So, but I think I did not connect to the rules of this like school that was trying to squash the spirits of children.
Yeah, well, I feel you. Like I was homeschooled for a portion of my growing up, and I had alternative education. I went to a charter school, and I was like basically at third grade, I said to I got pulled into like the counselor's office with my mom and like the school counselor, and they're like, "Amy, why are you so angry?" And I was like, "Well, you just can't go out there and be a pirate anymore." Like I was just like, I have this like intense energy of like wanting to go out there and do things and experience the world. And like, you guys aren't letting me do that. And that's why I'm angry, is that this isn't what I'm meant to do. I'm not meant to just sit here and follow the routines. It's funny though, because I also have like these ways that I get really strict about rules, especially if they're ones that I'm like choosing versus ones that are being imposed. And I think that's like the difference for me, is like, if you're telling me that I have to do things and I'm not consenting to this, then like F off. But like if I'm going into, like you said, a meditation or a yoga or an environment, and I'm saying, I want to be part of this, I'm saying yes to this, and there's all these rules, I'm going to be like so compliant, right?
What sign are you?
I'm a Cancer Leo.
Ooh, interesting. I'm a Capricorn.
Oh, nice. Yeah. What's
Opposite.
your, oh, let's do the whole astrology thing. What's your moon?
My moon is Taurus. My rising is Pisces. My Mercury
Mm.
is Sagittarius, and my Venus is Aquarius.
Oh, sweet. Okay. That so fits with what I have observed.
Yeah, because
I
it's
would,
like earth energy mixed with like what?
yeah. Well, especially that rising sign, like they say that with Pisces rising, like your eyes, like people will comment on your eyes, or your eyes kind of like draw people into like this other world or something. And I've definitely had moments like that with like your videos and your eyes. Like your eyes will like get real big when you're talking about something, and I'll be like, whoa, we're entering the quantum field right now.
Oh yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, that is very true. Yeah, because I do have like intense eyes for sure. I didn't know that. My other Pisces rising friend also has these really wackadoo eyes. Yeah, huh. I'm gonna like
Yeah.
investigate that more. That's cool.
Well, it's because they say Neptune's ruling your first house. So that's like this energy. They say the eyes might also, even if they're not blue, they have like a lightness to them. They have like a translucence. My son has a Pisces rising, and he's got blue eyes, but they're kind of Asiatic shaped like mine. So people are always commenting on them because it's not, you don't usually see like blue eyes that like have an almond shape or something.
Yeah, interesting. I love
Yeah.
astrology.
I think of it as like a language, people are like, oh, you believe in astrology. I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's a language that I speak because my mom raised me with it personally. Like, that's part of my lore, is like my mom was always talking about astrology when I was growing up. So there were times I rejected it. Like, you might reject Catholicism, but then there's like a part of my brain that's like, but what if it is true? Like, what if Mercury's in retrograde and that's why, or something?
Oh, there is no doubt in my mind that we are intimately impacted by the stars and our connection to the solar system, and that the archetypal analysis that people have been doing for thousands of years has some meaning and wisdom behind it, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like kind of coming back to some of the things we were talking about before, like these themes about marrying. And I feel like in your astrology, we can almost kind of see that, like with, bringing your earth signs, the Capricorn and the Taurus, like those are very much embodied signs, but they're kind of almost on opposite ends, because the Taurus is very like pleasure, like beauty oriented, and the Capricorn is like kind of more intense and like hardworking, right? And so in your videos, you're sort of like bringing these heavy, like material reality ideas into like your physical expression in your body, right? Where there is a certain amount of like laughter and joy and like clowning around that like occurs, but it's also like getting into some heavier territory. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do know what you mean. I mean, I think that I've been wondering a lot about what embodiment actually means versus like this buzzword that people say. And I like, you brought in the concept of integration earlier, but I also think it's exploration. It's like integration and exploration. And, I move my body a lot. And I also explore the emotional depth of my body. Like, I cannot have an injury and not then be curious about like the psychological underpinnings of my inner injury. Like, I was just at a, you know, Easter party for my kid the other day, and this woman is like, I dislocated my shoulder. She's just like a hiker, and I'm like, you're shouldering too much in your life. You're shouldering too much in your marriage. You're shouldering too much as a mother. You need to be cared for in the same way that you care for others. And she like looked at me and she was like about to cry. So like there is nobody that can speak to me about some physical thing that's happening, and like I will obviously and consistently comment on like my idea of like what the psychological emotional underpinnings of whatever their physical ailment is. So like I'm very into all of that stuff. I've been into all of that stuff for a very long time. It is how I approach my body and my illnesses, my pains, my psychology. And yeah, I find I'm like always hurting, I'm like, even though I do this, like, oh, I'm doing the work. I'm like, oh, my back and like, oh, my knee. Like, it is kind of funny, like how much like effort I put into like this embodiment practice. And yet my body is still just like, ow. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, what do you fucking want from me, bitch? Like I can't. And then like there's people who like smoke cigarettes all the time and they're like, I feel fine. And I'm like, cool. Like rad for you. I feel everything. Is that better? Maybe. I don't know.
It
I do
sounds like
I hurt a lot.
you've been a body whisperer, it sounds like, and you're sort of like listening when other people are telling you about their physical challenges. There's a part of you that just like connects really quickly with like the somatic element, which is that whatever whatever experience we had came with a physical contraction, like literally everything. And even though we don't feel it all at once, right? It's a full body experience every time because everything's connected. So like if you think about like how your face looks when you're stressed, like your like scrunchy stress face, that's not just your face that's contracting. There are muscles in your inner thighs, in your groin, in your stomach, in your lower back. They're simultaneously feeling and contracting in maybe a micro way, like it's not perceptible by most people. But when you have like a more sensitive nervous system structure, which it sounds like you do, you get that feedback more. You get more of that feedback from your body, and you are feeling more of that discomfort that everybody else has just like made normal and habituated, right? So it is kind of this double-edged sword because you're hearing what your body is saying to you versus someone who's just like totally got their like noise canceling headphones on and they're just like, oh, until it hurts like, really bad, like I'm not even there, right? But then at the same time, it sounds like you're looking for different ways that you can respond and listen to your body to actually get the relief, like to actually close that loop of communication, right?
Yeah, it's almost like I've opened the door of self-reflection and it's like so wide that like my body just does not let me get away with anything. And then that like quote unquote hypersensitivity that I do think I experience, does that make me a better person? I like to think so. I'd like to think so. Although I am playing in the waters of a lot of like okay, more learning, more growing, more evolving, more trying, more getting to know myself, more healing. Like, yeah, that's just why sometimes it's like good to just like unplug and like not feel like you have to heal for a second.
Oh yeah.
There's so much going on. But it's funny, like I can literally, I mean, I know this word is often overused, literally, but I can literally look at someone's posture and I'd be like, oh, would you like a 40-minute PowerPoint presentation about what's going on with you emotionally purely by looking at the way someone stands?
But yeah, I mean, it sounds like that you do have a gift for reading into or feeling into like what somebody's body is saying. And that's probably because you have that in you, like kind of going back to that idea of like actually carrying the things that you've learned in your own body, that you are someone who receives all this feedback from your body constantly. When you see it in someone else, it's like, oh, that makes sense to me. And, you know, it's all, one of my mentors called it a somatic sixth sense. Like he says, because there's different ways of doing things, right? He says, I've never looked at an anatomy book to try to like help someone with their muscles. He's like, because your muscles don't know what a trapezius is. Like they don't. They feel and they sense and they hold certain positions, right? And so when he like looks at someone, he feels what that might be like in his body. And then he goes about helping them to release that based on that like soma to soma, like sixth sense, versus like, let me look in this book and let me like, you know, try to section out and like pretend that your body is in pieces and let's put it back together, right? It's just different ways of going about things, but it sounds like you're much more in that like perception sensing type.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I had this, woman working on me once and she was a body worker. And, we were doing something with my right hip. I can't remember. And she was like, "Oh, I think you have bursitis in your right hip." And I was like, "Go fuck yourself." Like, I was just like, what the fuck? Like, bursitis, like, suck a dick. Like, I was so disinterested in that, like, word, even. Like, I was like, I was like, honestly, I would have more enjoyed if she was like, "Oh, you happen to have a demon in your right hip." And I would have been like, "Oh, interesting," Like, I guess I'm really just like a diagnosis is like, ugh, like who the fuck you think you are? And I really do like this idea of like soma to soma. It's like that skin to skin. You have a baby, and what do they always tell you? Like, put the naked baby to your skin. You will need that skin to skin data to be transferred to one another. And like, I'm so much more interested in being like, oh, like rather than being like, oh, I had this condition called bursitis, and now I must do this or take this, blah, blah, blah. I'm so much more interested in just like exploring my right hip and like all the ways in which that manifests in a physical, spiritual way, and like how I can support it, how I can, heal it, how I can develop the strength I need to release it. Whatever is going on, I'm open to so much language and I'm open to work and I'm open to suggestion. I just like I'm very disinterested in some like
Yeah.
diagnosis.
It's like a
Yeah.
label. It's like a label kind of getting like dumped on you. And you're like, now what do I do with this? There's no solution in this. There's just telling me there's something wrong with me that like may not actually, there may not be anything wrong. Maybe your right hip was, you know, maybe it was related to something you were experiencing. That's a good question. Like when you're going about your life, have you noticed that certain areas of your body respond to like situations in a certain way?
I think every time I have to just like stand for a long time, my body does not like it. Like I get so stiff to standing. I hate standing. It's like
Yeah,
I'll
the
move, I'll dance, I'll move, I'll walk, or I'll sit, but I don't want to fucking stand anywhere. I hate standing is garbage.
Yeah. So do you find that like you do that thing where you like kind of shift your weight from side to side? Like if you have to stand in line at the bank, are you like kind of like shifting a little bit, like doing a little something, something?
Oh, I'm like, like me at a party or me at any event. I'm like always like, yeah, yeah. Like standing is not for me.
Yeah. When I first started on like my kind of like body awareness journey, I noticed that like I would squeeze my legs together when I was in public all the time. And I mean, obviously, like you can totally, you know, I feel like you zeroing in on like, oh, what that might mean, especially if I was like on a bus or something, or if there were a lot of men around,
Oh
I would
yeah.
notice that unconsciously I would just like make myself smaller. I would like squeeze my legs together. And it was completely involuntary. And I had realized at a certain point, like, oh my God, I've probably been doing this like my whole life, like since I was a kid. And then I would realize that I was doing it and I would like consciously like soften that. I would like consciously like stop that thing that I didn't even know I was doing for most of my life. And so it's interesting just like making those links, you know, and maybe there was something for you in standing, like maybe there was something that happened early on for you where you had to stand for a long time and like there's something there. I don't know.
Just standing just feels like so adult. Like who just fucking stands? I've never seen a child stand. You know, they're always like, you know, doing something. The only time you stand is like, get in line, get in line and stand in line like a sucker, you know?
Right, right. Or I'm thinking like a soldier, you know, like that whole like archetype of like at attention, you
Oh,
know.
yeah. Oh, God. I mean, I guess you could do like Tadasana for a moment in yoga, but still, I'm like, well, let's get going.
Absolutely. So in terms of the, because you do the videos and you have your, you know, online social media presence, but then you've also been doing like live experiences, right? Is that like stand-up comedy, or I knew you did like a one-woman show, or like you did a show with your daughter. How do you kind of take like this model into like another format? How does that been going for you?
I don't. I mean, like, I have my online thing and then I have things that I do on stage, and I'm not trying to like congeal the two.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's not really like what I'm doing. Cause I think like the thing about, you know, and even in the online stuff, I'm not doing the same thing every time.
Oh, yeah.
I
No.
think that would get stale. I mean, the algorithm would like that. I think if I just like did dancing videos and that was all I did, and then the algorithm would reward me for that because they would know how to categorize me. But like as a person who like, you know, wants to explore different parts of myself, that was never something I wanted to do, was just one thing. And same with the live performances. Like live performance is very different than like being
Mhm.
digested on the internet. I think the thing about the internet is like two things are happening. You're not always editing, but you can edit your work. And like part of editing is creating like a rhythm, a visual rhythm of what people see with these cuts. And a lot of, almost all the dancing videos, 99.9% of them, I edit, and I edit them with a rhythm in mind. Like I know what I'm doing, I know how I'm saying something, and that rhythm is part of how people retain the information. Because otherwise, it's like, I mean, if you were to do anything, if you were to watch a dance and it's all one note, if it's all fluid or if it's all sharp, 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 then the brain starts to kind of tune out because there is like, it's too predictable, right? What
Right.
makes something interesting is dynamics. It's like, oh, this is sharp and now it's smooth and now it's up and now it's down. And so for me, the editing rhythm is part of the dynamic of those dance monologues. I don't know if it would translate live in the same way because it might just like, I don't know. I don't know. It's just not what I'm interested in doing. I like to do stand up. I'm a stand up comic and I like to do regular stand up. And then if I'm going to do a show, there are elements of dance, but they're more traditional elements of dance in a certain sense. Like I do a contemporary dance I did a show with my daughter called Go to Your Womb. And like we do a contemporary dance together and we do all these skits and we do monologues and we, you know, it's like a variety. I mean, I guess I want to say variety show in a certain sense. Those kind of things interest me. Variety interests me. So my live shows have a variety to them. And then I have a one person show called Men Come Inside of Me, where I like embody men and I embody myself and I become men and I invite audience members up. So it's like, I think I like to explore what it is to be live and like why being live is different than being on a computer, and like do that when I'm in front of humans.
That makes so much sense. And kind of, since you brought it up, like the times when you're like being some dude, you know, it's like scary because it's like, I've met that dude. Like
Oh, I
you,
love it, dude.
like I've met that dude. Like I have so met him multiple times, you know, and you are like too accurate or something. And I'm just curious, like, are you drawing from like sort of, I mean, it's probably a lot. It's like cultural references in a way that you're drawing from, but also personal experiences, or both, or is it one or the other?
It's me. It's my inner dude.
It's your unique inner dude.
My inner man. It's not a like impression of another man. It's the man in me. That's why the Men Come Inside of Me is the show, because I am talking about men I've come into contact with, but my embodiment of those men are how they are inside of me. the men that I
Mm.
relate to masculinity because I am masculine, quote unquote. I understand gender is a spectrum and blah, blah, blah. What is masculine? What is feminine? These are socialized traits. These are conditioned. This is part of our programming. Yes, yes, yes. I've read Simone de Beauvoir. I get it. And this is kind of what I'm exploring is like my own masculinity and my own connection to masculinity because I am a very dudely woman. Like I have a lot, like the role I am if you were to do whatever the attachment theory, anxious, avoidant, healthy attachment. I think those are the three types. So like culturally, most of the times women have anxious attachment, and so anytime you hear people talking about what it is to be a woman in relationship, they seem to be describing anxious attachment completely to me. That's what I'm,
Right.
and that the way men are more aloof, that's detached, right? That's distant. That is me. That is how I show up in relationships because that was how I was conditioned to be as a child. So most girls are like, "Oh, you cry, little girl." That's how you express your emotions. And then the crying creates a certain way of relating to people versus men. It's like, "Oh, you shouldn't cry, but like you can be as angry as you want. Show your anger, fine, that's warrior spirit." And so like men or boys are often conditioned to like express their complex emotions through rage, right? So women on average express their complex emotions through tears and men through rage. So like I just didn't have a lot of outlets for any complex emotions, either tears nor rage, right? And so the outcome of that on my like attachment style is to be more reserved. Like it's very hard to know what it is I'm feeling and thinking. I'm not like abusive. And therefore that is a more masculine way of being, quote unquote. And therefore, I attract men who are more feminine. I attract anxious men
Mm.
because whether or not they're quote alpha dudes, a lot of these dudes are like very angry, very angry alpha men. I've attracted many of those, but ultimately their emotional spectrum is anxious, and
Mm.
that is considered. Again, I'm putting it all in quotes to reinforce my understanding that this is all a construct. They approach relationships from an anxious / more feminine standpoint. So when I talk about my experience with relationships, my embodied experience with relationships, or when I'm talking to my friends about their embodied experience with relationships, I am always relating to the man. Like when my friends talk about their dudes, I'm like, oh, I'm on his side. Always, always. But of course I'm their friend and I can, oh yes, I understand you and you are my friend and I can do all that. But I'm like, let's talk about what's going on in his head because I actually understand him a lot better. So I'm like great at giving women, heterosexual women, advice about how to deal with men because I'm just like tapping into my own attachment style. And I'm also an amazing person at texting men who have my own attachment style because I very much know how to manipulate the circumstance. So if my friend's having a problem, I just give me the phone. I will turn it around, like I know exactly what to do, because I am him, he is me. So I mean, I don't know. It's just interesting when we think about like our relationship to this is why I explore men because I am a man, even though I'm
That,
also a woman.
that must be why it feels so authentic, is because it's coming from an authentic place in you. And so then when I come across this like very authentic expression of like, and I have to say, I love the way that you kind of brought these two spaces together of like the attachment theory and like duality, or these like masculine, feminine. It's like I hadn't really heard someone like marry these things before, but it totally makes sense, like 100%. And so I love that. And it's just so interesting that you like speak this language. The other thing that I'm thinking here is like Venus and Aquarius, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so that can be like we can use that lens to kind of say, hey, there's going to be more detachment here. There's going to be like more distance between you and like maybe your emotional body, maybe you and other people because of that. And there's strengths that come with that kind of like experience. And there are challenges, right? And it sounds like you've really honed in on some of the strengths, which is that you can relate to men in this very unique way that not all women can, right? And that you also are able to like understand the way that, I guess, in speaking this language, in your own words, you said manipulate, but you could kind of like guide things back to like a positive place, it sounds like, when things have gotten all like messy because we're having these two attachment styles like banging up against each other, or the men are from Mars, women are from Venus. There's like this neutralizing energy that you can bring in by like actually translating or something.
Yes, I am a translator. I'm a man translator because the relationship will be like about to implode, and I'll be like, "Give me your goddamn phone." And I'm like, "Now you're back in it." Is that a good thing to do? I don't know, but like I've done it for many a friend because it's like it's almost like this concept of rational versus emotional, right? And there is this again cultural insistence that men are rational, women are emotional. Like, first of all, I've never been with a man who has not punched multiple holes in my wall. Okay. That is very irrational and that is very emotional. So the fact that men have the reputation of being rational versus emotional is comedy to me. Okay. Like, that's hilarious. Men are so emotional. Men have more emotions than like, the average teen girl. However, it's just the way that these emotions are expressed are through like almost like two lenses, which is like fucking rage and shutting down. They don't have like the kaleidoscope of expression that women have to express their emotions because it's just like it wasn't conditioned in them, it wasn't allowed, whatever. So a woman might have more access to be like, I'm embarrassed, I am confused, I am insecure. Like, she may be more connected to the nuance of what she's feeling, and therefore there is more possibility for her to express her emotions, like, with more variety. And I think that's why men have this reputation of being quote unquote more rational, just because they're just like distant. They're just like, they're stepped back. They're like, there's an emotional landscape here. And then they're like back here kind of observing it or turning their back to it. So yeah, I think I'm very capable of compartmentalizing emotion in a certain way. Like, I sense PMS, right? I'm like, oh, I am experiencing PMS inside my body. However, I do not externalize it most of the time. I'm like, well, it's no one's fault that I'm feeling this. I'm not going to like put that on anyone else. So there is often times when like I'm experiencing inside my body like a certain tornado. However, what I'm expressing to the outside world isn't what I'm feeling, which, like, is that a masking thing? Is that a neurodivergent thing? Is that a people pleasing thing? Is that a trauma response to my childhood? We could pathologize that, to the moon and back. However, I am a slower processor when it comes to my emotional landscape because I want to have an understanding of it before I share it. So a lot of times someone will do something that'll be very offensive to me, and I will get a body reaction that like, oh, this is not okay. And I'll almost like clock it and be like, okay. And I'll still act kind and I'll still like, be in a vibe with someone and not necessarily like be reactive. But then later I process it with others, with myself, with my friends. And like, I then go through the slower unveiling of like, well, what was going on? Because it's very important to me to ask the question, why did that person do that? And if I'm just in a reactive space, I don't have time to have compassion and empathy or curiosity about why they did that. I'm just reacting. And so that is also, I think, part of my motivation of just like taking time before I react. You have to really come out your face at me to make me be reactive. And then, unfortunately, for that person, if they do that, the well of rage that is inside of me is volcanic and terrifying, so it's like, oh, if you get me, if I'm tired or I'm hungry or like, hormonal or overwhelmed and someone pokes me and like, I don't have that bandwidth that I usually have or that they're accustomed to of me like being a slower, more like quote unquote mature processor. I don't know, maturity is any part of it, just a slower, more like conscientious processor. The level that I will like go to unleash all these feelings inside of me, the endurance I have is unparalleled, like people, they will get so tired fighting with me. They will wish they never did it. I will 100% make you cry. There is no world in which you're not crying, you know? So is that good? I don't think so, but it sure is what happens. It sure is what happens, So it's just kind of like, it's hard to be emotionally mature because there is always a part of us that is very reactive, and like I don't
Mm.
want that side out very often. Maybe it's better to just be a little more reactive every once in a while. Who fucking knows? There is no better, there is no worse. There's just like external and internal processors. But that is how I process. I'm an internal processor unless you get me on a bad day.
It reminds me, my friend has this t-shirt that I swear, like I read it and I was just like, this shirt is deeply therapeutic on to me on so many levels. It says, I'm a lady, but if you make me mad, I'm a sadistic psycho bitch from hell who will make you wish you were never born. And when I'm happy, I bake muffins and shit.
Yeah, hell yeah.
I was like, yep, that's how it goes sometimes. And I think what you're saying about like having those moments where, and I'm sure other people are also like this because I have clients, I've experienced clients who have this, there's like a lag time, like you described it as longer processing. So like something happens and your kind of natural response is to just kind of be like, oh, I'm not sure how I feel yet, so I'm just going to default like continue to be normal. And then later you go and you're like sorting through and realizing, oh, this was like really not okay. This crossed a boundary. This was disrespectful. But there's like a sorting process that has to go on. And I think that sometimes people don't do that, and it sounds like you make a practice, or you at least naturally want to do that like sorting through, but sometimes people don't, and then they're just, that's where resentment, right, that's where like resenting people in your life starts to build, is that you're not actually sorting through and coming to terms with what you didn't like about the interaction, what kind of boundaries were crossed in someone's behavior with you, and you just keep tolerating that same like crappy, shitty behavior from other people. And then just kind of like you said, compartmentalizing it or just like putting it back there. Right. And there are theories about that kind of like that, when we have a practice, an unconscious practice of doing that over and over, we store it in different places in our body. Like I'm sure you're familiar with these ideas, like breast cancer, for example, being like a form of resentment for like giving, so over giving to people or something like that, like over giving nourishment and stuff. And that we have this way of like, oh, I have this response or this reaction. And if I don't take the time to actually sort that out, it's just going to get stored somewhere in my physical body and build up. Right.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like breast cancer as a phenomenon makes perfect sense with like how women show up in relationships, how women show up as mothers, the resentment that you have a partner that's using their weaponized incompetence to have you do everything, and then you do not humanize yourself to your children, and so your children kind of view you as a function of their need versus like a person that gave birth to them. So there is a plague, or like what was that thing we just went through? That corona, what was that?
Oh, what was a pandemic?
Pandemic. Yeah. I was like, what was that thing that just happened? There is a pandemic of this as like women and mothers, especially if you're a wife to a man, within the patriarchal system. And like, I see this constantly there. I'm never like, what? Breast cancer? I'm like, yeah, that adds up. I can like see it in the way you operate in the world. Not to blame. I mean, I think that the hard thing that happens is then people feel victim blamed for their unhealth, or like, oh, well, why would a child ever suffer? Why would a child ever get leukemia? Like I understand how this thought experiment has holes in it. I'm not victim blaming, and I'm not saying any child deserves a disease
Mm.
or any person deserves a disease at all. It's like these are just ways of thinking about our health and our bodies that actually puts some power in your hands. And that word power is like slightly complex because I'm not insisting you have power over anything. But when I think of like, oh, I'm dealing with this health problem with my stomach, for instance, and like there are things I can do emotionally that are part of the healing of my gut, that feels like I am taking responsibility for myself. And to me, that is an exciting thought versus like, I'm blaming myself, I'm a victim, et cetera, et cetera. I don't resonate with victim consciousness, because I think that when I get into that place, I've been sick. I've been that. I understand that. I've gone through that. And I think like one of the things about being sick or like not being well is I personally had this unconscious expectation that like, oh, everyone's going to be nice to me now because I'm sick.
Mm,
That was
yeah.
not the case.
Yeah.
Absolutely wasn't the case. And it was a very like lonely way of discovering like, oh, I can be sick and people can still be very shitty to me. Like this isn't my salvation. Sickness is
Mm,
not my salvation. It's not going to be how I'm going to develop boundaries or how people are going to finally care for me in the way that I so deeply crave but don't know how to ask for, or don't know how to access, or don't know how to receive, or they just are just too happen to be too narcissistic to even notice or give. Like if I want that type of caring, it's not going to be through me being sick. It's going to be through me embodying caring for myself and embodying caring for others, and then pulling in the vibration of others who have that capacity. You know, the capacity to fully care for another and nurture another person. Like that is a skill that is demonstrated, that is learned, that is practiced, that like we all need more of. And so I always kind of like bristle a little bit too when self-care is just presented as if like, oh, this is this thing you do for yourself. It's like, no, it's self-care is
mm,
for community.
yeah.
Self-care is for like how you exist and you operate in the world. And that is very motivating to me, not as a martyr. If I martyr myself, I'm not self-caring. If I martyr myself, I'm not being a better mother. I'm not being a better friend. I'm actually just allowing someone to be a shithead. You know, so
Right.
there is this kind of dance we have to do about care, like caring for people truly authentically, but also insisting on your own humanity, insisting on your own need for care, insisting on a structure and a platform where you are receiving and not just giving. And to receive is to give, and to give is to receive.
Absolutely. I think it's a public service
Yeah.
to do the things to take care of yourself and not carry around like all of the bullshit that's ever happened to you. Like when I think about the somatic work that I've done, in my own personal body over the last like 10 years. It's like this was a public service because not only am I actually able to help other people through that stuff now, which is obviously like a very clearly we can define that as service, but the way I show up in the world is differently. The way that I interact with humans at the grocery store or the way that I like, deal with things in my interpersonal relationships, it's going back to that idea of having integrity, and if we're out of integrity with ourselves, we're not going to be able to be in integrity like in other areas of our lives. It's just not how it works. There's only so long that we can like pretend that we have our shit together, that we, have it figured out before like that is all just going to like explode and we're going to realize like, oh, no, I actually do have to do the things to take care of myself, whatever that means for that particular person, right? Otherwise, I'm kind of useless out there in some ways. At least that's been my experience. But that's also coming from like, a highly sensitive person or someone who gets a lot of feedback from their body. And like my body kind of demands, like your body seems to demand that I do something about the things that are building up in me.
Yeah, like when we think about the self as a tool, right? Myself, my human body is for me to enjoy, for me to explore, but also to be a force of joy for others, right? So example, I have a child. When my child was young, she wasn't as rational as she is now, but from the minute like her entire life, she would have to come with me to my dance classes. If I was teaching, if I was going to a dance class, if I was teaching a dance class, if I was at home and I wanted to move, she would have to come with me and she would play and wait for me to be done. I would bring her a bag of babies and I would be like, you play and I'm going to move my body and then we're going to connect. And if she was like, no, I want to play now or whatever, I want my needs met now, it was always very clear. I was like, in order for me to meet your needs authentically and to do what you want to do and to play, like very far outside in the woods, which you want to do, I have to first do what I need to do, which is like be in my body. And then we do what you need to do. Like I asserted my humanity with my kid her whole life. And that is, I don't think that mothers are given permission or give
Mm.
themselves permission to do that. So it's like, oh, I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to do this because I have the kids. Your kids can watch you fucking exercise. Your kid can be there while you do it, and they don't have to be on a screen. They can be bored even. They can be like, oh, I'm so bored. You can be like, that's fine that you're bored. I'm going to do this until this time. And that is what is happening. And then I will hang with you and we will connect. And I just like, my wish for, women, mothers, wives, whatever, people, women that are part of like systems where they're so often erasing their bodies and erasing their bodies' needs, is to just keep reminding your family, like, no, 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 this is a non-negotiable. This is me connecting to my body so I can show up for you and I can show up for myself. And I'm not erasing myself for you. Like that's
Mm.
not being a good mom. That's not being a good wife. That's not being a good partner. That's actually just allowing you to overtake me. And then how are you gonna, then you're gonna
Right.
overtake Earth. You're gonna overtake Mother Earth. You're gonna overtake other women in your life, like not to be all about gender, but like these are things that we've gendered as female. We gendered Earth as female, and yet we continue to rape, abuse, extract, all of these things that we do to women, we do to the Earth because we gendered her as female. So, long story long is that like by prioritizing your body and like having a connection to your body and getting to know your body, being curious about your body, going to the healer, going to whatever the fuck you need to do for your body, like that is you being a good community member.
Oh, hell yeah. And like for your kid, you're showing them how to take care of themselves. You're showing
Yeah,
them how to do that, right? And they will
that's
learn
so
that.
funny.
Yeah, he came in, my kid just like boop, popped his head
Yeah.
in.
But that's
Yeah.
partnership, right? Like your partner
Yeah.
understands, oh, I don't know, wife or partner, she's busy, like I am going to be the nurturer because my partner is busy. Like that's not a mind-blowing concept, but obviously this is a culture of your family, which is like that you are the priority right now.
Oh yeah,
Our needs are the
totally.
priority. And like that is so important for women to prioritize themselves within their family. And that is not being selfish. That's actually creating a healthy culture within the family to let yourself be a priority.
Thank you. I received the positive affirmation of like what just happened because like it's something I don't see all the time. Like sometimes, my kid is like whiny or upset because I'm like, no, I'm taking the time to like do the things that I need to do because I do that a lot. I let him know and I do take care of myself first before, I read him his book. Like there was this dumb thing that we did early on where he would like not eat his food unless I was feeding it to him. And so I would like read him a book sometimes while he was like finishing his food. Well, now he's 5 and he still wants me to do that. And he wants me to do that while I'm eating. And I'm just like, it's like a no. Like he still asks me, but just like, no, I'm going to eat my food and I'm not going to. And he's like, it's okay if you take bites while you read me this book. And I'm like, that's not okay with me. That's not how we're doing things. But like, I think that, once people have set some kind of standard in their world, they're like afraid of deviating from it. They're afraid from mixing it up and changing things because, yeah, people are people, your husband, your kid, whatever, are probably going to complain a little bit because it's different than whatever they've been, operating under before. I like what you said about they don't have to be on a screen. They can be bored. They're allowed to be bored because then what happens? You grow up and you have a kid and you're like, why does my son like not take care of himself? He just lays around and plays video games all the time and like doesn't take care of his body. Like, what's going on? Why does he do that? And it's like, well, what did you show him? You showed him you not taking care of yourself, what in your childhood, not prioritizing taking care of yourself. And so, and then anytime that you were doing something, maybe you just had him like on the phone or playing his video games instead of giving him that tolerance of like nothingness, the tolerance of being bored, right? And then also demonstrating what it means to actually maintain your physical body.
Yeah, and like I get it. Like kids can be annoying, like I have a kid who could be annoying and who sometimes is like, oh, and complaining. I just happen to be comfortable with like letting her complain or letting her be
Mm.
mad at me. I'm like, okay, you're mad at me. You can be mad at me. That's fine. That's a reasonable
Mm.
reaction to not getting what you want. However, I'm not going to do what you want just because you're mad at me or I'm afraid of your reaction. Like your reaction can be valid. It can be annoying. It could be explosive. It could be whatever it is. I'm not taking it from you. Yet your reaction doesn't have to dictate my actions. And like I think that's where like partnership, when you have a partner, like sometimes you're on your own or whatever, but like the partnership is that like just reminding the child like, oh, like you are my priority at this moment, but you are not mom's priority at this moment. You will be again, but not right now, and even when you're just alone with your kids, sometimes you have to be like, hey, I have to do this thing. You're not my priority at this exact moment. You will return to being my world. And the only thing I'm paying attention to in X amount of time. But however, like I am going to prioritize this thing because this is what I need to do, or I'm choosing to do, or I want to do. And I think there is like a transparency. I mean, I know we're like on a whole parenting tip, but like I talk to my kid all the time about how I am parenting her. I will say it is not good parenting for me to do that. Like I
Mm.
understand that you've asked 100 times and like respect your tenacity. However, it would be very bad parenting for me to give into you, because then I'm showing you that you just have to ask me 100 times and eventually you'll wear me down. So even though like you have successfully worn me down, I'm still saying no, because it's better parenting. And then what does she say to that? Sometimes I'm even like, well, what would you do as a parent? And she'll be like, I don't know. I'm not the parent. And I'm like, well, do you have a better piece of advice for me? Because if not, I'm going to continue with this strategy of saying no.
Yeah.
She's just kind of like, ugh. I'm like, what did you do? I'm like, I'm parenting you. That's what I'm doing. This is the parenting process. Saying yes is easier, yet that's not good parenting all the time.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. I love it. I love what you're saying. It's like it's good medicine for me to hear it because I definitely was raised by a more permissive parent. And so there are times when like, yeah, my kid like has worn me down, like, and I'm just like, okay, fine, but then I want to change that. I do. I actively work to change that and to like hold that integrity again and like, reprogram that, message that I received from my, more permissive parent. But, I just have loved this conversation today. We've gone over like a whole bunch of different gamuts here. And, one thing that I want to just kind of tie in with what you just said was like this little bit of like detachment of like letting your kid have their own experience, right? And just being okay with them being mad at you, being okay. That kind of goes back to like that, Venus and Aquarius, that like, the gift of the avoidant attachment style, you could say, because I don't think these things are all like just good or bad. They're like human experiences that we've given these like labels, right? But your specific like imprint and what you're kind of sharing with us today, like there's magic in that. There's magic in having that bit of distance. And I think that that's part of how you're able to be so profoundly impactful as a comedian doing this really edgy kind of work where you're bringing in these painful, serious world issues and you're bringing in the element of the clown, the element of comedy, the element of like self-referential, like, just digging in to like yourself and sharing with us that self. It's like that's part of that gift that you have of having that like compartmentalization, that distance between things, right? And so I just want to say, like, I think that you've been able to like share with us some of that today and people have been able to like receive that. I know I did, and it feels
Yay.
really nourishing. So thank
Okay.
you.
Yay. Yay. Fills me joy. That fills my heart. That fills my cold black heart.
Yay. Cold, black, distant dude heart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that fills my balls. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, this has just been super fun. I knew that like I would have a blast hanging out with you, and I'm so glad we get to share this conversation with everybody. If people like want to catch any of your live performances in the next year, do you have anything coming up that you want to like drop
Oh,
into?
yes. I have so much. If you go to my website, toninaj.com, TONINAGY, I often put things on there. And then my social media, I'm always promoting shows. So follow me on Instagram. That's where that's where you'll get the juice of it all.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I highly recommend if you haven't heard of her before and you're hearing of her for the first time today, go check out, follow her. You won't regret it. It will take you on a wild ride through human consciousness and yeah, be beautiful and terrifying all at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes. You've been listening to the Free Your Soma podcast. To find out more information about today's guest, check the show notes. And to find out more information about me, Amy Takaya, and the Radiance program, visit www.freeyoursoma.com.